For the play Intimate Apparel, question one, what did I notice? At first, I noticed that Esther's character was kind of an anomaly. She had a job and she knew how to sew and she was driven, but she was also living in a female boarding house and she wanted to marry a man with money. She seemed intelligent because she could sew and had a job, but she also was illiterate and didn't know how to like write a letter to George. It was also interesting to me with Esther's character that she kept flip-flopping between George and Mark. I think she knew she wanted to marry Mark maybe a little bit more, but George was like the safer option. For question two, what two values are being represented? Um, for the first one, I said female standards of marriage. The female like boarding house was always sending girls off to get married. They just wanted girls to grow up and get married. They didn't need to have any other aspirations. Mrs. Van Buren, she always wanted to be the perfect wife for her husband in similar ways to also Mrs. Dickinson, who was always looking to please her husband. And then even Mamie tells Esther that her only chance to marry will probably be George, so she should just do it and not try to even look for someone who might be better for her. The second theme or value was the American dream. This was definitely mostly portrayed through Esther. She was obviously not born and raised 100% like being treated the same as everyone else. So her life goals was to get a family, find a husband, but also make her own money, get her own job, and open her own beauty shop, which is like the stereotypical American dream. And throughout everything that happened in her life, she still like maintained that same like diligence and drive. For question three, something I was reading that I had to look up was boudoir. I didn't know what this room was. I just kind of thought it was like an area. I didn't know if it had like more context. So I looked it up, and after learning it was like a typically private female dressing room or bedroom, it made a lot more sense as to why the women were like always talking in there and why it was like the place to dress in the lingerie and stuff. For the issue of diversity, for the three R's, I think reinforce, resist, and reinvent. I think this play reinforces the reputation of the African American experience. Um, it shows like the intense struggles of the African American women and also men, but more women, dealing with racism and misogyny at the same time, while also lacking or being like the lowest rank of education. Esther is depicted as a woman who grew up in that female boarding house and doesn't have an education, but she also she was good at sewing and she wanted to open up her own beauty shop. So I think the depiction of Esther, and I think the purpose of that was to show that she was trying to break some of the stereotypes surrounding like the typical African American experience that isn't the same as like white people. For question five, I think still today there are definitely stereotypes for African Americans and other groups in especially the United States. This summer has opened my eyes with a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests. I definitely think there are still people that feel that they know more about a group than they actually do. So I think education is a huge issue that just as long as people are educated, stereotypes can be overcome. I think one way to do this is the use of social media. I know this was a huge help for people's understanding of like what actually happens in certain situations and what ways they can help. And then my two questions are, was George ever truly in love with Esther? And do you think it was right for Esther to go back to the female boarding house after her marriage ended?